What's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. I'm Ben. This is my Husqvarna 701 Enduro. I purchased it about a year ago now, and apparently that makes me a moron, according to Yami Noob's old buddy. And if that wasn't bad enough, now I woke up this morning to find that my best internet riding buddy out there, Dork in the Road, thinks that this isn't even a motorcycle worth purchasing. So today we're gonna hop on my 701, we'll take it out for a ride, and I'll tell you guys what I think they got wrong.
What a nice day for a ride. I get a few raindrops here and there, but hopefully we can keep the lens clear. So first of all, I want to start off by saying that all joking aside, I totally respect both Dork in the Road and Spite. I think they make good content, and I know how hard it can be to get a full review on a bike in a short period of time. I honestly still don't feel like I've gotten enough time on this bike to really flesh out all the details. I still don't think that I know this bike completely, and I'm not at all saying that. So if any of you guys own one of these and would like to chime in, I would definitely appreciate it. One thing that both of those guys said, which I was sort of surprised to hear, is that the vibrations that sort of carry from the motor to the rest of the bike are still kind of unpleasant on the newer models, and I don't know that the 690 wouldn't have followed suit, but I believe after this year model, the 2016, I believe, or I heard from some of you guys, that they put something else into this motor to sort of help balance it, a double balancer or something like that, if I recall correctly. And essentially, you need some sort of balancing to replicate in sort of the opposite timing, the up and down motion of the giant single cylinder. But I do definitely have to agree with Dork in the Road that this bike, being a KTM or Husqvarna or Gas or whatever, they're all the same. The box of rocks sound that this engine makes really does kind of throw you off. There's just not the same sort of connection between the sound that the bike is making and the amount of wheel spin there is, and maybe that has something to do with the fact that this bike makes almost twice the horsepower of most thumpers that I've been on. And if you guys are unfamiliar, I have been on the KLR 650, both a Gen 2 and a Gen 3. I've ridden a DRZ 400, and I've also ridden a real adventure bike, a Tenere 700. And after putting a sufficient amount of time on each one of those and trying to do my style of riding, which is essentially having to put about an hour of seat time in on the road to get any seat time off-road, really. And that's really kind of the goal of any of the builds that I've been doing. There's the rain. The XR 650L and the DR 650 that I just picked up, and honestly sort of this bike, I wanted, I guess I kept saying a lightweight or midweight adventure bike, but I think really what I meant was a lightweight or... This isn't going to be good. This is too much rain. I think what I really want is an adventure dual sport, and I think honestly Dork in the Road got kind of caught off guard by that and sort of had a bit of too much of a preconceived notion from people that say this is a really good adventure bike or a good bike to build into an adventure bike. I think some people hear that and think that it is an adventure bike or that it's going to feel like an adventure bike. And there are certainly, I think, some things that you can do to this bike that would make it feel much more like an adventure bike. But the thing is, a dual sport is never going to be an adventure bike, and that's for the simple fact that it is a dual sport, meaning the geometry is set up to be like a dual sport. The seat is a dual sport seat. Stock, this bike has almost a 37-inch seat height, and we will get into that a little bit later, but mine has been lowered, was lowered by the previous owner, actually by a reputable suspension shop. It was dropped, different springs in the front, different spring in the rear, and then it's actually pretty much set up for my exact weight, which is about 155 pounds. What do we got here? Little ducks, I think. You guys see anything? There we go. Hopefully that's a little better. I'm going to crack the window on the helmet here. So what I'm trying to say here is if you're going to buy one of these bikes or test ride one of these bikes, hop on it and it's still raining. And assume that it's going to feel like a Tenere 700 or Triumph Tiger or even a 901 or even in its stock configuration, gonna be able to take that corner like an average lower dual sport. I think you're gonna be very disappointed. For me, there are three things that make a bike an adventure bike. One is that it's not a dual sport. It's set up for comfort. It's set up for on-road comfort. It's set up to be a little bit heavier and be more planted on the road. And it's, I mean, basically got an engine in it that does not have a single cylinder. They're essentially going to be 2 and up, depending on what you look at. I mean, most midweight adventure bikes now are just going to be that parallel twin 270-degree crank, like the Tenere, the Transalp Array, the V-Strom Array, and all the... Where are you going? Okay, and don't get me wrong, on the road, that makes those bikes so much better. I do definitely miss my Tenere 700 on the road. It doesn't matter whether I'm on this bike or my XR, my DR, it doesn't matter. I mean, that setup for a motorcycle and for adventure type riding, I think is very, very hard to beat. And again, if you're going to try to find something lighter than that, that's going to be much better off-road. And if you guys missed the video where I compared this bike to my old T7 on some gnarly, awesome ATV trails, I would definitely highly recommend you checking it out. I'm not going to be doing a whole lot of off-road riding today, but I think that video in and of itself hopefully will explain well enough to you that there are some major differences. There's definitely a lot of reasons to go with a bike like this, but there's also a lot of reasons not to. And if you're going to spend most of your time on the road traveling, this isn't really going to be the bike for you. If you're going to spend a lot of time off-road, though, and you need to do a bit of traveling to get there, and you're willing to sacrifice that on-road comfort, riding a dual sport on the road, essentially, or on the freeway, then, well, you're definitely going to notice some good, really good benefits off-road. And honestly, I will say that I think, really, out of all the bikes that I've got right now, or really have ever had, this is probably my favorite bike, just because of the power to weight ratio. This 2016 model makes a few less ponies, but now they're claiming 74 horsepower and just about 320 pounds. And there is just absolutely nothing like it, and it's always good to be a little bit unique. And that's where I think Spite is definitely right, that this bike sort of has a bit of a monopoly on the sort of, well, I guess, big bore dual sports that were designed in this century, or after I was born in 1990 anyway. I mean, there really just isn't anything out there. The XR and the DR are great bikes, but if you're looking for something more than those bikes have to offer with their, you know, only 35 at the wheel horsepower or 40 at the crank, I mean, there's really just not another option other than a bike like this. And I will agree that there are some things that, especially Spite pointed out, that are sort of weird, that you wouldn't expect to see, or you'd expect more from a bike that is so expensive. I mean, the DR and the XR are what, 7,000 new? This one is 13,000 new. I mean, of course you can find deals, and I certainly wouldn't want to pay that much for one, but I mean, this is not an inexpensive motorcycle, and yet the little indicators here are glued in and pop out every once in a while. The dash itself, I mean, is basically a battery-operated thing that you could purchase from Trail Tech and slap on any dual sport. And I mean, that's basically manufactured to turn an off-road bike into an on-road bike, where this bike, I mean, it should be, for the price anyways, a pretty good dual sport. And you'd think that bottom of the barrel basic dash isn't what you'd find. You wouldn't think you'd have to glue in your indicator lights. There are just some sort of, I don't know, odd things about this bike that definitely don't make it feel like a Japanese bike. And if you guys have spent a lot of time on Japanese bikes and go to look at one of these, I think you would understand what I'm saying. I mean, it's just kind of the fit and finish. It's nothing bad. I mean, other than that, there isn't really anything that I can specifically point out. It doesn't have that Japanese quality, which, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It's good to have bikes that are a little bit different. If everything was exactly the same, life would be pretty boring. So, I mean, it's not the worst thing. It's just something that I think it might kind of catch you off guard, depending on what you're used to riding. And honestly, I think there are no bad motorcycles out there, and I don't think you're a moron for buying this, and I don't think Spite thinks that either. But I think there are definitely bikes that are intended for a specific type of people and specific purposes, and I think this bike is for the type of person that is not really interested in an XR or a DR or a KLR, but still wants something that can do highway speeds, that can be made into an adventure bike. And I think one main thing that is missing from this as an adventure bike, even mine, is good wind protection. And I've got this little 690 fairing on here that, I mean, it basically gives me a little teeny tiny clean air pocket here, which is nice to keep the wind off of my chest, but it does very little to basically nothing for my helmet unless I really tuck behind it. And I mean, even then, I'm just getting blasted with the buffeting. So if I was to purchase one of these myself, and I wasn't a YouTuber, and I was gonna make it into a bike that would run BDRs, I think there are a couple things that I would do, and a windshield. Come on. A windshield like this is definitely not one of them. I would do the full rally fairing that brings the headlight and the dash kind of all the way out to here, gives you a little bit more cockpit space to see your GPS that you can mount a little bit higher, is going to give you much better wind protection. You can even get some that have, I think, fairings that kind of come down for even a little bit more leg protection, although these side fairings do provide, I think, a tiny amount. Now, of course, that in and of itself is not going to turn this into an adventure bike. The biggest complaint, I think, that you will find hopping on one of these to begin with, and I think this is kind of what honestly threw Dork and maybe Spite off a bit, is just the fact that the stock seat absolutely sucks. And Spite also mentioned that his bike didn't come with the sort of aluminum core actual useful hand guards. They just come with the flappy piece of plastic, and you don't, like he said, have the windshield. You've got incandescent headlight bulb. I mean, I definitely get all of that and the irritation with, needing to add mods, but the thing is, any dual sport you go out and buy today, it's going to need handguards like this. And maybe not any, I know some of them don't, but the majority of them, they're just basically expecting you to upgrade it yourself. If you want, a decent set of hand protection, if you want decent lighting, you need to upgrade it. And especially the seat, which, I mean, is obviously a little bit more expensive and definitely probably the biggest investment that you'll have to make as far as aftermarket stuff goes. But the thing is, I mean, where do you spend, I mean, I guess depending where you're riding, the majority of your time? On the seat. And if you're not going to buy a seat to make yourself comfortable on here, well, you're not going to be comfortable. And that's not really anything specific to this bike. Really, all of the bikes that I've got in the garage could definitely use that. And honestly, as much as having a seat that's a little bit wider and having a seat that has really, really nice comfy foam in it, the thing that I like most about these seats is the fact that they have a grippy material that sort of helps you stick to the bike. And my biggest complaint and sort of uncomfortable factor on this bike when I got on it was the fact that it had so much power that when I would hit the gas, I would just immediately slide to the back, and anytime I'd hit the brake, I'd slide to the front. So having a seat that keeps you in place is definitely helpful, as long as the bike isn't, 37 inches off the ground and you don't have a 31-inch seat height. 31-inch inseam height like I do. I think this bike would be extremely tall and extremely uncomfortable for me if it was in the stock configuration. And I know a lot of people, myself included, are very against lowering a bike that is meant to be off-road. But for my subscribers, if you guys watched the XR lowering video, that bike had a very similar seat height and a little bit more ground clearance than this one did. So I dropped it just to kind of see what would happen, because that bike is so high that going around the corners, whether on pavement or especially on gravel, trying to slide the rear end around on the gravel. I mean, really just trying to do anything, even just kind of weaving side to side. It felt like basically a building ready to fall over. And by just lowering that bike 1 inch in the rear and 3/4 inch in the front, I mean, totally made that bike so much more rideable, so much more comfortable, so much easier to fishtail it and to go around corners sideways. I absolutely love my lowered XR, and I don't think I realized it when I bought this bike, but I think I really love my lowered 701 too. And this bike has, again, a 36.4-ish seat height, and I think right around 10 inches of ground clearance, almost 11. Where the XR, I'm still left with like 12.25 inches of ground clearance without me on the bike. So, I mean, I didn't lose a whole lot there. This bike, I am probably about 8 inches off of the ground, but my old Gen 3 KLR was basically the same. And while, I mean, maybe I scraped bottom a few times, as long as you upgrade your skid plate, which I would highly recommend on this one, and I really, really like this plate that I've got on here. I can put a link for it down in the description. It's not an affiliate link or anything. I just think it's an awesome plate and the right choice for this bike. Yeah, as long as you've got that stuff and you know, you keep it in your head that there are going to be so many more positives by lowering the bike and lowering the center of gravity, essentially, and lowering you to a point where you can actually ride it and feel comfortable on it. That little bit of ground clearance, I don't think is going to make a big difference. And I'm not saying you should lower every bike, but if you really want something like this that is a dual sport, but can really, really be very, very comfortable on the highway compared to a lot of dual sports, not comfortable from the fact that it's an adventure bike, but comfortable with the fact that it's comfortable on the highway, especially, I think, partially with it lowered, but also the gearbox and everything. I mean, this thing can do everything from single track to 70, 75, probably even more on the highway. And while it still has, you know, a 21-inch front tire, and mine's got the knobby D-Sport tires on here, I mean, it's still, I think, a lot better off on the highway than you'd expect a dual sport to be, but that is exactly the angle that you have to come at this from, is that it is a dual sport, that you're turning into a bike that can be ridden similarly to an adventure bike. Not an adventure bike, but a dual sport adventure bike. And tires, I think, are a nice segue, and definitely, I think, a thing that both of those guys are certainly missing out on, because as much as I've heard people say that they like the Continental TKC 80s, I absolutely hate them. I ride on snow, I ride on ice, and while you can't expect an unstudded tire like a D-Sport to really do an excellent job in those conditions, these do a heck of a lot better than the Continental TKC 80s. These do a heck of a lot better than the Continental TKC 80s. I immediately lost the bike in my driveway that I had just ridden down several times with other bikes and different tire combinations. I tried to do a little bit of mud. I tried to do gravel. They're good for the road, and I think they're good for the average motorcycle rider, but not somebody that is really serious about getting off-road and doing anything more than light gravel. If you're going to ride mud at all, the TKC 80s, it just cannot keep up with this bike. Now, one thing that this bike has that none of the other ones that I think I've purchased to date can say is that the foot pegs on here are long enough and wide enough that, I mean, I do not feel any inclination to want to switch them out for anything else. I mean, for me, they work just fine. I know some people probably still do stick bigger foot pegs on here, but for me, they work great. I did rise my handlebars up on some Rock's offset risers for a fat bar, so they're up and forward, which definitely makes this bike feel much more comfy to me. Just cruising around on the pavement or the highway, it certainly feels good and much better with the risers on here standing up. And I mean, it gives me, I think, more than enough room between the foot pegs and the bars that I feel comfortable, you know, getting a bit of a stretch in, but also if I want to ride aggressively off-road. It really just feels like it fits me extremely well, honestly, at my size. And the seat on here, I think, is way more comfortable than either the C-Concept seats that I've got on the XR or the DR. And I think it's mostly just because it is just kind of flat, and that is sort of a dual sport trait. Obviously, if it's flat and skinny, that's not good, but flat and wide, I don't know. I like it. It's probably one of the most comfortable bikes that I've got to ride on for long periods of time now, to be honest. far the most exciting. The hydraulic clutch I really, really like. It definitely has a great feel to it. It's not something that you should be afraid of at all if you're not used to it. It makes it much easier to control off-road. You can easily do it. I can easily do it with one finger. I think it's great. The suspension, even though it's lowered, it definitely handles itself really, really well off-road. Honestly, probably better now that it's been lowered. I've bottomed it, come close to bottoming it a couple times on some really big jumps, but I mean, it's not a motocross bike. You know, if you want one of those, obviously those are on the market. That's not what this is. If you're going to have a bike that's meant for the road, you're going to have a bike that's lower and, you know, much more fun in the corners and much more fun on the off-road trails, sliding the tail around. I mean, you're just going to have to make some sacrifices, and ground clearance and suspension travel, you know, is going to be one of them. But I don't really think that's a bad thing. And if you're looking for a bike to do road riding on, I mean, that's just what you're going to have to do, or deal with the consequences in the other direction, I suppose. And honestly, I think this bike's sweet spot is right around 60 miles an hour. It'll definitely do faster, but especially without the wind protection, I mean, this thing just feels really, really nice here. And I believe, yeah, I am in 6th gear, which is, again, you know, something that my other bikes don't have. The XR and the DR don't really seem to need it, at least I haven't noticed it yet. But at 60, I mean, even with the little bit of buzz in the bars, I mean, this is a super, super comfy dual sport to ride at this speed. I mean, I could put a lot of miles on. I have put a lot of miles on this way, and it's not near as comfortable as an adventure bike, but it's not an adventure bike, and I don't think it has to be. I think you just have to realize what you're getting, and I think for the type of riding that I do, this type of bike just makes a lot more sense. So I guess what I'm getting at is I think if those guys had the proper equipment, a better sticky seat, if the bike was dropped just a little bit for them to lower that center of gravity, you know, if they were willing to do the mods, you know, which I'm sure they are, just like you would have to with any other dual sport, you're just, I think, going to be set up a lot better, and the bike is going to feel so much, I don't know, more like it's ready to do, I think, what we all want it to. That's a dead end. And I think they'd better to be able to enjoy the fact that this thing has, I mean, just a ridiculous amount of power and is so much fun. And this bike is definitely not for everyone. There are a lot of people that I think would be a lot better off on something more reasonably priced that has a more reasonable amount of power. But like I said earlier, if that's not you and you're not going to be happy with that, I think these are definitely good bikes to look at. You know, even if you just want a big bore dual sport, but especially if you want a dual sport adventure bike that is only 350 pounds. I mean, hundreds of pounds less than most of the bikes that are marketed as adventure bikes. I mean, there is just nothing. There's no amount of traction control or rider modes or anything that can take away that weight. And if you're somebody that is new to off-road riding, or somebody that really wants to push a bike off-road and, you know, isn't that interested in the on-road performance, I mean, that's who this bike is made for. And that's where, I mean, there's just no substitute for having a dual sport to do dual sport riding. And I know that, you know, basically adventure bike riding and dual sport riding aren't that different, but I think they are dissimilar enough that, again, if you hop on this bike thinking it's going to be a great adventure bike, I think you're going to be disappointed. I think this is a great bike to be ridden on and off-road, but with a much more off-road, in a much more intense off-road bias, and maybe even a little bit more intense on-road bias. I mean, this is sort of cream of the crop, you know, the top of the line dual sport that you can get. And I know that maybe there are some things that don't feel so top of the line on it, but it's still a monster of a machine. And I know a lot of you guys out there that watch the channel do really love these bikes. I've got quite a few guys that own them that say that, you know, they agree with a lot of the stuff that I say, the negative stuff. And I think most riders of these bikes would, because, I mean, you got to be pretty realistic and pretty real to stick this much money into a motorcycle. And I think we all, as owners, understand that they do definitely have their drawbacks, but so does every other motorcycle out there. And if you're gonna check these off your list as bikes that aren't for you just because other people told you that, or because you think you need an adventure bike, I think maybe these are something that more people, should give a second thought to, or give a second chance to. I mean, you always hear that, oh, it's a KTM, it's a Husqvarna, it's going to break down. The dealers are crap, they're expensive, but I don't think any motorcycle is above having some sort of mechanical failure. No dealership is perfect. I mean, they're all trying to get your money and get you back out the door, and then, they don't want to see you again. I mean, not to say that there isn't some truth to that, and it's, of course, I think something that you should be aware of and be prepared for, but there's a deer up there. But again, to me, I don't think any of those are enough reason, obviously, to completely discount these. And that's really why I decided to try one, just because I had no idea. I wanted to make, form my own opinion and see what I thought of it. And to be honest, I mean, like I said, this is an insane bike and does not really make sense for probably the majority of riders. But that doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of riders out there that I think it does make sense for. And I think it's pretty obvious that, Spite has some plans for his, and once his is upgraded, I think he knows just as well as I do that it'll be a great bike for the type of person that wants a little bit more than the average dual sport. And I'm kind of surprised that Dork didn't find it more similar to his 450. I think I'm going to have to buy myself a CRF 450, either an L or an RL at some point, and just see how it compares. I don't know. I guess I'll be interested to see how it compares. But I would say that you should definitely expect something pretty different compared to everything else you've ridden. If you've never been on a KTM or a Husqvarna or a gas or anything like that, you should probably definitely expect to have to stick, a few bucks into it to mod it. Maybe even $1,000 to put the full rally fairing on it or more. But the thing is, if that's what you're looking for and it's not out in the market, why not stick, a couple extra bucks into it, or quite a few extra bucks into it, to make it exactly what you want? And I think life is short enough that it certainly is worth making a few mistakes. And if this is a bike that has captured your interest and you want to see what it can do, I mean, of course, as long as you're not going to have to mortgage the house to pay for it, I think it is a bike that is definitely worth further investigation. And I've specifically told my subscribers that I'm probably not going to keep this bike very much longer, which I know is sort of at odds with what I just told you. But the thing is, for me anyways, I think the sort of middle ground at dual sports, the big bore dual sport dinosaurs, is just where I should be spending my time right now. And honestly, I mean, I've been planning on doing the couple things that I need to this bike so I can sell it. But I will tell you that I'm not in much of a hurry for that, and honestly, I don't really know that I'm going to be able to. I think maybe I'll just have a pet motorcycle, and this won't be a bike intended for making videos on like the rest of them are. But obviously I still get out and ride it once in a while. So if you guys want to see more content like this every once in a while on the 701, don't be afraid to hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care, stay safe, stay swanky, get out, enjoy this beautiful world that God created for us any chance you get. And if you can't do that right now, here's some more videos to check out in the meantime. I don't know where I am, and that storm does not look very friendly.